Welcome, everybody. I am Phoebe Morad. I think I know most people here, but for anybody looking off into the future, hello and welcome. I'm Director of Lutherans Restoring Creation, and we're here to promote more creation care throughout the ELCA and following communities. And I am speaking to you from land where Massachusetts people continue to care for the planet. If you wanted to write into the chat where you're zooming in from, if you know the original Earth Keepers, where you stand. Sometimes we have been sharing our very general land acknowledgement. It's kind of a knowledge acknowledgement. Today I have a guest speaker that doesn't even know he's a guest speaker. He's going to do our land acknowledgement today. I wanted to highlight Pastor Nick Upthal. For one thing, you should all know that Pastor Nick was one of the founders of Lutherans Restoring Creation. And he was the one that put together, if anyone's ever used Let All Creation Praise, it's a really wonderful ecumenical site that has a lot of wonderful resources. And it's one of the first places I ever heard about Season of Creation. Anyways, Nick has been a founder in many of these things. And he decided when he went off on his sabbatical, not just to walk 1,100 miles along the Age Trail, but also to ask friends, family, everyone within his circle to give to Lutherans Restoring Creation. And I'm going to put in the post in the chat a little fundraising link because we are so close to him raising $11,000 for us. So I'm really psyched as to how far he made it. He had to take a break for a knee recuperating. But we're really, really close. If anybody can take that link and share it and add a few bucks, that would be awesome. We're very close. So with that, though, that's my introduction to Nick, who doesn't even know he's doing the land acknowledgement today. But this is a couple minutes that I think is well worth it. So as we settle in, he will start us. And then, let me share sound, optimize video, share. Make this a little bigger, and there
Hey
it
there,
is.
it's a couple of weeks still till Indigenous Peoples Day, but I want to pause to acknowledge that the land where I am right now on the Ice Age Trail and pretty much the rest of the way is the ancestral homeland of the Anishinaabeg or Ojibwe people. That's significant to me because it's also the land where I was born and grew up. If you'd like to find more, you can visit native-lands.ca and find other places. When I was healing and waiting, one of the books I was reading was The Land is Not Empty by Sarah Augustine. She writes about the doctrine of discovery, which was a way for European Christians to be able to claim lands of others who weren't Christian, with the sense that if people weren't Christian, they either needed to convert or else you would go to war with them. And so the lands were claimed, the people were removed with an erasure of their identity, including in boarding schools where they were sent, quote, to be Christianized, just gross. And so that went on into U.S. policy here of, indeed, removal and erasure. So as I've been out on the Ice Age Trail, we haven't heard a whole lot about Native Americans. We talked at Devil's Lake about that being a mistranslation of better being Spirit Lake or Holy Lake. The Dells of the Eau Claire, when I was there, had some graffiti saying "Land Back." When I crossed the Wisconsin River, there was a place called Turtle Rock that the guidebook acknowledges was an important place for ceremonies for multiple peoples through the years, but not a lot. In fact, a couple days ago, there was a sign about logging, and before that, the Homestead Act, which was, of course, a way for white people to be able to get land. And this sign said unwanted land, sort of not acknowledging at all that there were people who'd been here before. So if the glacier left 10,000 years ago, that's probably a lot of interaction of people in this land. But it's odd to walk along and not get very much of that. And so as with the Ice Age Trail, there's great work for restoring and repairing land and acknowledging some history, getting oak savannas and prairies back to what they were. It seems that it would be really good if we could have some acknowledgement, some restoration, some repairing of relationships of what has been taken from Native people. including the 11 Native nations here in Wisconsin who had part of these lands along the trail as their homes, and many other places around the world as well. So there you go.
Round one.
Oh my. Thank you all so much for listening. And like I said, I will put that in the chat so you can follow along with him, but also certainly add whatever you can and keep it going. I will hand it over to you, Gabrielle.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for those of you who just came in too. It's good to have you all here. And I'm just going to very briefly introduce our speaker for tonight. We have with us Christine Moffett from ELCA Advocacy, who is the Program Director for Environmental and Energy Policy. We're so glad to have her here. We've been able to collaborate a lot with Christine. A lot of her work intersects a lot with the climate justice and all the sort of creation care that we're trying to do on the grassroots level, which all feeds like many tributaries into one river, hopefully up to the work she's doing in DC. So we always have great calls together. It always generates so much energy. And I'm especially glad to have her because if you're like me, things happening on the global scale might feel a little distant, especially when you add jargon around something like COP29 and you start getting into nationally determined contributions and NDCs, and it all feels very big. So Christine is going to act as our translator tonight. And in addition to the great teaching that we're going to receive, it's also, it's an initial title of this session was a listening session. So not only will we be audience members, but I hope that we'll all get to actively participate. And Christine has methods of hearing our feedback. So I hope that this call about advocacy will not stop with this call, but it'll continue on after we finish, and it'll inspire you to share what you've learned in your own communities. So without further ado, Christine Moffett, thank you.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Yeah, that was a really good intro because I was going to mention that as well. I will do some talking today, but I'm really hoping also to do quite a bit of listening because advocacy is best when it's informed from people at the grassroots level. So I hope to inform you guys about the work that we do and the work that the ELCA does on behalf of our members. So, and then also remind you that we can be a resource. So I hope that the conversation today can yield some insight about what LRC hopes to see the ELCA speaking about, especially when it comes to international climate advocacy. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, which means inevitably I will lose visuals of people. So if something urgent, a question is really burning, please speak up, but I shouldn't ramble on too long. All right. So I'm going to start out today a little bit about overall, the ELCA and climate justice, and then how the United States can contribute. So first of all, thank you all for coming. For me, it's, past 8 o'clock. And there's a lot of other things that we could be talking about or thinking about. I will name, it does feel weird to be talking about global politics when we're coming up on a really important election. I know that that's taking a lot of the airspace and the headspace for all of us. But hopefully, this is a treat and a break from domestic politics and election engagement and whatnot. So that's how I'm treating it, at least. So I actually have done this presentation with a colleague, Savannah. That's why she's on here, but she's actually no longer with us, unfortunately. But yes, welcome
She moved on to another location. She's not like off the planet.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
that sounds bad. With us as the ELCA. She actually works for the League of Women Voters,
Yes.
I believe.
Yes,
Yeah.
League of Women Voters, another great
So
spot.
cool.
So
So cool.
yay to
Yeah.
Savannah. And she's still Lutheran. Woohoo!
She's still Lutheran. She's with us. She's with us in
Yes.
that. Yes, yes.
Great.
Yeah, so I work out of the ELCA's advocacy office in Washington, DC. So most of my work is federal facing, but I do also do some of our work that is international with the UN, and especially with the United Nations framework on climate change, so the UNFCCC. So what I'm hoping to do this evening is really talk about how our advocacy is grounded, the priorities of our climate justice advocacy, how we advocate, and then hopefully this Let's Take Action part is where you guys will chip in, and I'll get to hear more from each of you. And then hopefully we'll have some time if you have any questions. Also along the way, if there's any questions, please feel free to speak up. We have a small group, so. Actually, while I'm at it, would someone be willing to read this excerpt on the screen? Please unmute.
I will. The Earth is a planet of beauty and abundance. The Earth system is wonderfully intricate and incredibly complex. But today, living creatures and the air, soil, and water that support them face unprecedented threats. Many threats are global. Most stem directly from human activity. Our current practices may so alter the living world that it may be unable to sustain life in the manner we know.
Thank you. So I really think reading that, and the people in this room, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. But oftentimes whenever I use this excerpt, I ask for reactions. What do you hear when you read this, or when Greg reads it?
It starts off so happy, and then I become so despondent at the last line.
The next question I asked is, when do you think this is written? If you know about, there is a hint in here, which I should really take it off, but yeah, when do you think this is written? If you know it, don't say it. Maybe we have a bunch of social teaching experts in the room and everyone knows. Any guesses? All right, shy group tonight. So 1993, and that actually is the driving point for me putting this excerpt in here, because when I read this, obviously similar to Phoebe, it's like, oh yeah, it's beautiful, you know, like this seems very relevant to me. It resonates with me and how I see the current state of affairs. And then I realized this was written in 1993, and and then it makes me kind of angry because I'm like, what? We knew this, and we talked about it, and we as a church stood up and said these things in 1993. Full transparency, that was before I was born. So to think like in my entire lifetime, this has been something we've been hoping to work towards. Not us as a church and moral failing, but us as a world. So yeah, anyways, that really sits with me. So can you guys see the whole screen?
Yes.
Okay.
All three. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so when our advocacy through the ELCA's advocacy office, it's grounded in really three foundational things. So first of all, our call, right? So the ELCA does identify our call as part of this to seek the common good for society, provide a moral vision, and are committed to addressing social and cultural injustices. And a lot of that is articulated in our social teachings, which we have quite a few social statements, then social messages. And I know that many people, some of which are in the LRC network, have helped to write these. So I don't need to belabor that too much, but my portfolio, the environmental portfolio, is really the cornerstone is the caring for creation, vision, hope, and justice social statement, which is where that thanks, Phoebe, where that last excerpt was from. And then most recently, the 2023 social message on Earth's climate crisis. So most of what we can put out through the advocacy office and things that we're advocating on behalf of really need to align with what's written in social teaching. So typically when we're looking at specific legislation to support, that's kind of what we're cross-referencing. Does our social teaching support this? Is this where, where we're at? And then lastly, our members and ministries. So the social teachings can't cover every single issue area that might come up. And so we really do rely on networks that exist within, LDR, World Hunger, Amparo, and Lutheran Restoring Creation. And so that really, listening to what these Lutheran networks are seeing on the ground, as well as hearing and wanting, is really important to furthering that advocacy beyond just a static social statement or message. So with all that being said, it's hard to condense all of, a portfolio that covers environment and energy, which can seem quite broad, into some priorities. But this is kind of how I view my work and what we advocate on behalf of. Obviously, environmental justice being a top priority, ensuring that whatever policies we're supporting intentionally lift up concerns of Indigenous communities, low-income communities, ethnic minorities, and then especially in the case of international climate developing nations. Then we have climate mitigation, so policies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and obviously reflect the urgency of the moment. Adaptation, which is equipping communities with the ability to adapt to climate change that we're already seeing, unfortunately. I feel like the summer of natural disasters for me was making that really evident. And then lastly, resiliency. So kind of along with adaptation, beyond just allowing communities to adapt, but then setting them up better, building back better, not as a political slogan, but but as an actual action, and helping communities to thrive rather than just get by. And then, so our team within the ELCA is actually called Witness in Society, and that consists of state and federal advocacy. So we actually have state public policy offices across 19 different states, and then a federal office in DC. And then we also do corporate social responsibility and advocacy to the United Nations in conjunction with the Lutheran World Federation. So we have an office in New York City, as well as our Lutheran World Federation colleagues are in Geneva as well. And so attending like the UN General Assembly, but also different UN conferences around the world to really bring that Lutheran voice. Quentin, I see you there. Who you looking at?
I'm just trying to see who's in the pictures. I feel like I know a lot of the people.
Yeah, actually, so on the left, the first picture
Yeah.
is the Pennsylvania delegation that came to DC. And then
Now Bishop Penman,
yeah,
who wasn't when he came. Yeah.
before he was a bishop. Yes, yeah. Yeah, and Quentin's here, and he was in one of our state offices in Pennsylvania. So really happy to see a familiar face.
Yeah. Glad to be here.
I love that picture. I've used it, and I actually did this presentation to Bishop Penman was in the audience at one of them, and he's like, "Hey." Okay, so with that being said, I want to kind of center us in this global context now that I gave you a quick overview. And so I have this message from a colleague. He also works for the ELCA, but lives in Tanzania. And he sent us this response when we asked him what he would say to Americans about why they should take action on climate change. Okay, let me make sure, hopefully the sound and everything works.
Hi, I'm Daudi Nsima. I live in Arusha, Tanzania, and my role is to strengthen companionship between Lutheran churches in East Africa and those in the ELCA. I'm joining from the National Office of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Tanzania. Tanzania and Kenya are being battered by floods right now. And not long before that, we were suffering under drought. There aren't really normal years anymore. It's like we bounce back and forth between extremes, from flooding to drought, drought to flooding. Even now, as I'm recording this, there's a cyclone called Hidaya that's coming towards the Tanzanian coast. And the only other cyclones to make landfall in this country in the last 100 years, think about it, 100 years, were in 1952, before my mother was born, and in 2019. For our neighbors in South Sudan, it's even worse. Their climate-related disasters are causing violence, as semi-permanent floods have caused people to migrate from their homes to places where other people are living. So they compete for resources and they clash. This beautiful continent holds 20% of humanity, but has contributed only 3% of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions. The global north is the place where these CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases are coming from mostly. The choices you make in the global north very much affect us who make our lives in the global south. And when I say choices, it's great if you switch off your lights to save electricity. But the choices I'm talking about, the things that can move the needle on our climate emergencies, are policy choices. Our Lutheran siblings here in Tanzania are doing what they can, especially in alternative energy. They started building biogas projects back in 1976, and they've built at least 1,500 of them across the country since then. The idea with that is to use gas from livestock manure that's trapped, and then it can power stoves and lights and other household uses. Another example is in a rural area in the south of the country for electric connection. The church there, they built a hydropower plant, and now they're selling electricity. There are youth-led programs to replant coastal mangroves, including one that was just launched yesterday. There are women-led conservation agriculture projects in different parts of the country, and hundreds of acres of trees that are planted. The church is doing what it can, but it will not be enough.
I've watched this video so many times, but he leaves it on such a strong note.
And
Yeah.
can you tell us when he recorded that?
This was in May. In May, yeah. So really, well, I'll go back before we get to the next section. I'll just say, I've had the chance through this position to engage at the UN on climate advocacy. And really what Dowdy is saying here is the takeaway that I received in going to an international conference on climate change as an American is an interesting experience, because you keep hearing about the effects that countries are seeing, and you overwhelmingly, if you're even slightly aware, realize that it's because of us and the American lifestyle. And we're also the ones dragging our feet on making these changes in order to avoid the worst effects. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting feeling, because it's a sense of guilt, but it's also a sense of importance, and hopefully not an inflated importance, like we're so important because we're so great, but more so we're so important because we have such a large footprint and such a large responsibility. And so engaging in these international spaces really made me realize how important it is to do the work at home. We can't control what the whole world will do, but if we do make a difference in the US, we can make a very large difference. And it doesn't just rely, it's not just for us, right? So this is what Dowdy is saying. We have, especially, I mean, if we're just looking within the ELCA, we have partners all across the world that our congregations and our ministries support, and that support will be less helpful if they're also flooding or overheating or being hit by cyclones. So I don't think I need to convince everyone in this room, but yeah. So with that being said, how can we make a change? We're not all going to go and negotiate on behalf of the United States at the UN. None of us can. No one in this room, I don't think, is doing that, unless Phoebe invited someone I didn't know about. But we can make the change within our own country. And so I strongly believe that what the US determines or decides to do within the next 5 to 10 years could really make a big difference as it comes to climate change. So I guess, how should I start this? So I think many in the room are probably familiar with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement it came out of what we're referring to as COP, which is the Conference of Parties for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And COP took place in Paris in 2015. And it was there that they came to an agreement, the first of its kind, that all the countries that signed on to the UNFCCC, which is most countries, and all the countries in attendance would agree that we were to do whatever we can to avoid increasing the global average temperature by more than 1.5% or 1.5 degrees Celsius. And by doing that, every country that was in agreement would determine their own contribution for how we would get there. And these are called nationally determined contributions. If anyone has taken an international law or international relations class, you'll realize that international law oftentimes has no teeth behind it. So no one's holding these countries accountable. So they're nationally determined. So no one's telling them what to contribute. No one's telling them, if you don't do it, this is going to happen. Really, it's all an opt-in situation. So, pessimists or realists in the room will be like, what's the point of these? And we're probably not going to keep up with them. But setting targets is important, and setting an ambitious target sends a message. All of that to be said, I'll play this video to really clear up, because I'm not the best person to explain, but I wanted to at least give you some background. This will tell it in a different way about what nationally determined contributions are. But the reason we're talking about these is because they're redone every 5 years. So in 2015, the countries decided what our nationally determined contribution would be. In 2016, the United States pulled out of the Paris Agreement. So we no longer had an NDC because we didn't agree to limit warming to 1.5. And I believe it was 2020, maybe 2021, we rejoined. And our NDC at that time, I will show you later, but we wrote an NDC. In 2025, it's time to make a new one. And so that's kind of why we're talking about this, is that ahead of creating a new NDC, we want to hear how we can make that as ambitious as possible. Let me stop talking. Let me play the video. Hopefully that'll clear up. And then if you have any questions, let me know.
What are nationally determined contributions? The Paris Agreement empowers countries to limit the global average temperature increase to as close to 1.5 degrees Celsius as possible, to strengthen climate resilience and ensure financial flows are consistent with these goals. Nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, form the basis for countries to achieve Paris Agreement objectives. NDCs embody efforts by each country to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. They communicate the ambitious efforts that a country will undertake to address climate change. NDCs are nationally determined so that countries can put forward the most ambitious contributions that their national circumstances allow. NDCs contain information on targets, policies, and measures for reducing national emissions and on adapting to climate change impacts such as floods or droughts. Some NDCs also contain information on either the needs for or the provision of finance, technologies, and capacity building to enable ambitious climate action. Countries communicate new or updated NDCs every 5 years, starting in 2020. In doing so, they follow guidance adopted in Patricia in 2018 on information to facilitate clarity, transparency, and understanding of NDCs. Subsequent NDCs should be more ambitious and not backslide to lower ambition. This is how, at a global level, our actions become more and more ambitious towards reaching the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Communicated NDCs are recorded in a registry maintained by UN Climate Change.
Okay. She's fast when she talks. Okay, so how many of you have heard, or how many see this as this is familiar? Reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. I believe is the memorial the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from. The ELCA has a memorial that asks the church to do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny because when I really started looking into this, I'm like, this NDC, this seems like just, I've heard it so many times, it's like burned into my brain, and I didn't realize this is supposed to be only a 5-year thing. This is our goal for 5 years, although it's still by 2030, but you should be putting it into motion in 5 years. And then in 2025, you're making a new goal. This is the extent of our entire nationally determined contribution. This is all the US has said that we will contribute, which
This is as detailed as it gets, you mean?
Yes, this is as detailed as it gets. I actually added the green part at the bottom saying explaining economy wide, because that's it. And the US has like, well, the Biden administration specifically has put out like some national strategies. So you can find like the national adaptation strategy, the national resiliency strategy. They've put out strategies. They're much longer documents, and they're pretty documents, more domestic focused. And it's supposed to guide. It's all supposed to feed into this NDC. But as far as what we've committed directly to the United Nations, this is it. And from that video, you can tell they even mention like you can include adaptation measures, you can include policies of how you're going to get there, you can include financing. We have not done, this is it. Which that can say a lot about the process because it's not super clear. Every country can kind of submit whatever they want. But with there not being teeth at the international level, there needs to be teeth domestically. So we can be the people, hopefully, that hold the US accountable as we write a new one of these. So anyways, with that being said, our target is to reduce the electricity, transportation, building, industry, and ag sectors by 50 to 52% by 2030. We are not on track to meet this currently. We have made strides in the last 2 years. I believe it's somewhere between 20 to 30% increase in renewable energy. So that could be like the electricity sector being decarbonized, but yeah, we're not on track to meet this. But that doesn't mean we just keep this for the next 5 years, because that's the whole point, is to build ambition, right? So, and we're going to end up talking about, I'm hoping to hear about what you would like to see out of the 2025 NDC. And so I think having the current state of affairs is helpful. So according to the EPA, 31% of our greenhouse gas emissions are residential, 30% are from industry, 10% from agriculture, and nearly 30% from transportation. So it's spread pretty evenly, actually. And most people that have seen this are really surprised by the agriculture. I would agree. I think oftentimes it seems like it would be higher than that, but okay. So, oh, Phoebe, were you going to say something?
No. I have a question, but keep going.
Well, you can ask, feel free.
Sure. I guess my question is, I guess whenever anything says nationally determined, I'm like, well, no one asked me. I live here. And in general too, you know, when, you know, in our internal politics of the ELCA, all those social statements, it came out with a, hey, all, what do you think of this statement? And then we had a time to give feedback, like who really determined, who all was asked, and more importantly, I mean, I know you said that there were some strategies put out there, but it depends, like who's really obligated to do anything? Were there any strings attached at all, or any other, is there across nations, are there certain people that at least have peer pressure amongst themselves, or just when they show up at the UN, they're like, yeah, sorry, this is all we got? Like who talks to each other and has that kind of peer pressure at what level? Because it's certainly not somebody like Biden, you know, he might have signed off on something, but who has that kind of accountability to each other on the UN stage?
Yeah, good question. So strangely enough, you know, that it's interesting because most like administrative, so anyways, these commitments come from the administration, right? So depending on who gets elected next week, they're going to essentially be writing this next NDC. Yeah, so typically with administrative actions, they do have to have a public comment period similar to the ELCA, right?
Okay.
Like
There's just not a lot of
federal,
news about it.
Well,
So who would know?
that's the thing. The NDC does not.
Hmm.
But
Mhm.
if the EPA were to do something, you know, that's gonna, but these are just like international law commitments, you know. So these have very little like local input put in, which is why those of us in advocacy are really wanting to kind of stir it up a little bit. Like, okay, well, someone needs to hold them accountable into creating an ambitious target, or else this kind of flies under the radar. And yeah, Sharon. Oh, I think you're muted.
Muted. Yeah. There you go. Oh, we still can't hear anything, Sharon. Nothing. I don't hear any background or anything. Oh, but now you're muted again. I'll hit the ask to unmute button. Maybe that will help. No. If you, oh, there you are again, but I still don't hear anything. Do you want to try typing? Sorry. Bummer.
Yeah, so and then as far as like the negotiators, they are housed in the State Department, and they can negotiate on behalf of the US. And so they're the ones that develop this. Strangely enough, so previously it was an appointee to, it's the title of the office is the US Special Envoy for US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. And last year, actually most of the Biden administration, it was John Kerry. He resigned, and then Congress passed this law where special envoys had to be approved by Congress. And so then it made it really wonky as far as reappointing. And so instead, this is being handled by someone within the John Podesta is his name. He's like a senior advisor to Joe Biden. And so he's leading up the negotiation with a team of people from the State Department. And so that's who does this negotiating and creates the NDC.
Okay. Sharon has her question up.
I would like to see where this data was gathered, both geographical and socioeconomic. Were specific groups or people selected, or was there an open share? Are we talking about the greenhouse gas, the emissions?
Yeah, the slide that's up now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. And you know, a couple times that I've presented this, I've had questions. Yeah. I've had questions about this, especially about like, what does it mean? What does residential mean? And what does industry mean? I'll be transparent. I haven't dove into the methodology of this data. But I can put the link in the chat. I can exit a little bit.
Yeah, I do see that it's from the EPA, so I can find it. I think
okay.
Greenhouse Gas Emissions Factors Hub from the EPA.
There's like a greenhouse gas emissions
hub. There's
yeah, and you
reporting
can
program. I see. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Way more information, I think, than you'd ever want on this question, but there you go, Sharon.
And you can split it by state too. And so that was like something that I've had groups do in the past, is to look closer at where they live and what it is for their area, because that can be really, really telling to painting the whole picture. Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
Go for it.
Those categories are so broad, it's kind of hard. Those 4 categories don't connect with the previous slide, I guess. And, you know, major sources, like the military, right, is a big source. I'm not sure, are their emissions showing up as like transportation and industry, I guess, or so, or and would agriculture, would that be food waste and landfill emissions from food thrown away in landfills and stuff? Yeah, I'm not sure what so it's kind of hard to connect those four categories to what the commitments were, the building electrification and some of those other categories you had on the previous slide. So that's what makes it confusing, I think. Say electric, right? Because electricity sector, some of that's going to go to industry, some goes to residential.
Yeah. And transportation. Yeah. So I think really, which I think is, that's a good point that you're raising. It's really interesting that the US government made the NDC and defined economy wide. And then the EPA gives us data, not in compatible form, really weird. But yeah, I think whenever I actually deep dove the last time, that was really where we saw kind of it get murky, was between residential and industry. The other ones are a little more clear in transportation and agriculture. There is an industry sector, yeah.
I guess the other confusing part in general, I'm sorry, I see Jaden has a comment, but I just also wanted to mention that figuring out, measuring is important. And I mean, if we say we're going to do this, how are we going to know unless we don't measure? And yet, from a denominational standpoint, we don't even know what our level was at 2005. So it's really hard to say once we're going to hit half of that, 50% below, because we're not sure. And I do wonder if there are other ways to reduce our inputs rather than only thinking about what the emissions are. Like, how have there been other ways as far as like, on a personal level, I just do this half as much and I try to drive half as much, like I try to half my input to the system, not necessarily knowing how that's really impacting everyone, but I know I can control that and I can control my schedule. But I'm wondering if there are other thoughts about how to really measure those kind of inputs rather than how they relate to emissions. But knowing what is bad, right? Knowing what we can know is important, but waiting to do anything about it until we have all the measurements figured out, I think also just makes us chase our tails more. Sorry, Jaden, I didn't mean to take over your, I'll go ahead and read it if that's okay, Jaden, because I'm not sure if you want to add. You can certainly go off mute if you want, but I'm going to read, I know in Iowa, agricultural emissions are from tillage, applied fertilizer, and emissions from livestock. Agriculture excludes equipment, such as dryers or tractors. That's very interesting.
That's really helpful, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal to exclude equipment.
Yeah. And I will just say, like, the issues with measuring and the issues with our data can be issues with the whole thing. This can be feedback. Like, we don't want a vague NDC that can be interpreted in a way that makes us look better than we are, or right. If we're not including, I mean, I didn't even think, no one's brought up the military aspect before, but there's no way that's included. So yeah. So really what I was hoping, I'm glad this is like fostering some thoughts and some discussion. I have some discussion questions, and originally we were thinking breakout groups, but we do have a small group here. And so I think we can hold the discussion here. And
would everybody be more comfortable if I stopped recording for a little while to feel like you can converse? Is that, I will do that for a moment.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay. So we're back out of conversation. Go ahead, Christine. What would you like? What do you ask of all of us in the future and beyond?
Forever.
Forever.
Yeah, I would just ask that you continue to have these conversations, because talking about this stuff, having people talk about this stuff can be the most powerful advocacy. And as you have these conversations and the things that bubble up that you hope your church speaks out on, and then therefore you hope your country speaks out, or at least embodies. I did include a form in the PowerPoint. I can put the link, I think,
Yeah,
in
that'd be great.
chat. And it's just a Microsoft form. But in there, and it just has space for the questions, the discussion questions that I included. And if you were to fill out this form, I keep that form open regularly as input to our advocacy efforts. And so it would be really helpful to be able to say, you know, our Lutheran, not just say our social, you know, teachings tell us to stand on behalf of this, but also our Lutheran members and Lutherans Restoring Creation specifically wants us to stand for this. And if it's something that the ELCA, you know, because of social teaching or whatever, we can't speak as boldly as we would like, maybe that means we should be writing memorials or something, and that can kind of bubble up as well. So
and would you ever tell us to, like, tell us as Lutherans Restoring Creation, listen, this there are things that are being brought up within your network that we don't have a social statement behind us as a full church-wide body, but as Lutherans Restoring Creation, do you want to share this message with your reps, or that, you know, like, I think that's a good way to work as well going forward. Absolutely. If you ever see that bubbling up. Okay.
Yeah. And so anything that you guys, if you have this conversation within your communities, your churches, congregations, and you want to, you know, submit some of the feedback that you've gotten into this form, I can review it and then always talk to you, Phoebe, about kind of what we're hearing. So yeah.
Christine, thank you so much, not just for being with us tonight, but for doing what you do, for sharing the voices that you get to have access to. And I just think so many of us forget, we forget that we're associated with a synod, but we certainly forget that we're associated with a church-wide organization, but especially a church-wide organization that is then connected throughout the globe. And you brought those voices to this table tonight. So I thank you very much for that. But also, it goes both ways. The voices that are at this table, you'll be able to share. So thank you so very much this evening. I didn't know if anybody felt it's an hour through. Does anybody feel so called to close us in prayer? I'd really appreciate it. Sharon, I wish you could, but I know you can't. You're in listening mode only tonight. Anybody else want to unmute and close us in prayer? Quentin's going for it, aren't you, Quentin? Are you? Yay!
I wasn't, but I can.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Let us pray. Creator God, thank you for the ways you gather us together. You bring us into community, into conversation, into discernment, into ways that we can walk more faithfully, walk in the ways you show us, walk in the ways that remind us of our connectedness, of our relationships with one another and with all of your creation. Continue to lead us and guide us and strengthen us to make decisions that prioritize your justice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We'll have a little follow-up post that will have the links, all the things that were shared, all the things. And you can keep sharing this, and many prayers to all of you doing a lot of great advocacy this week and beyond. Yes. Take care. Be safe.
Get out and vote.
Bye.
Don't forget that. Bye-bye.